Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Green Jeans. I'm your one co-host, Annika Van Rossum, using pronouns she, her, joined by my other co-host,
Maya Van Rossum, also using pronouns she, her.
And if you couldn't tell by our names, we are in fact related. We are a mother-daughter duo who talk about important social and environmental justice issues through a generational lens, because for somehow, some way, some reason, a lot of the issues my mom was either dealing with or her generation was raising alarm bells way back when are still issues that are occurring or have reached their peak scariness in this day and age for my generation. But we always talk about it in a positive way and show you how to be your own little activist. So so this week's topic we're going to be talking about, because I saw a news alert and it was really interesting. So Hurricane Ian just happened, and a lot of people are just returning to Florida, just starting to get back to their homes and figure out, how they're going to do their properties and fix things up and all that. And there actually was a solar community that experienced no power outages and very little damage to their homes. And it's also a climate resilient community in Florida.
That's really interesting. Where was that written up?
I actually saw it on CNN was where I got the news alert, but I've seen a bunch of articles about it now. But that's where I got the news alert, and I said, oh man, we have to do this topic now.
Definitely. So what's a little bit more about what happened? I mean, is this the only community in Florida like this?
I don't know if that's the only one I could find. I mean, they didn't report about any similar ones. So it's called Babcock Ranch. And it calls itself America's first solar powered town. And it's nearby. So this is the CNN article. It's nearby solar array made up of 700,000 individual panels, generates more electricity than the 2,000 home neighborhood uses, in a state where most electricity is generated by burning natural gas, and which causes climate change. So and they have their own little website, and it actually looks really fun, and I want to move there.
Well, I always find it interesting and annoying, frankly, in terms of Florida. So like the few times that I've been to Florida, and I have to be honest, it's not my favorite state, but the few times that I've been to Florida, you sort of drive around and it's all sunny everywhere, sun, but you don't see solar panels everywhere. And it's always very shocking to me. And of course, it is a state where we hear a lot about fossil fuels, and we all have to have fossil fuels and stay on fossil fuels and use fossil fuels and this pipeline and that fossil fuel operation. And it just always, to me, is quite shocking. And one of the arguments really is that we have to have fossil fuels because when the sun doesn't shine, or when the wind doesn't blow, or when the storms come, we won't have energy if we just go on clean and renewable energy options. So what you're saying with this town, and I've heard this story elsewhere, and I'll bring that up later, but what you're saying really with this town, it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like too, from the articles I read, I'm also scrolling through their website right now, is that they really built it also to not, like, it's not just solar, they built it to be climate resilient. So again, the CNN article says, the streets in this meticulously planned neighborhood were designed to flood, so houses don't. Native landscaping along roads helps control stormwater. Power and internet lines are buried to avoid wind damage. This is all in addition to being built to Florida's robust building codes. And then they also said, so the excess power also goes back into the grid and is used to power surrounding communities. And at night and on cloudy days, so they do have a natural gas generator to fill in gaps, it sounds like, from an NPR article. But nothing's perfect. And I think especially a lot of, again, reading the article, like they've really built this with climate resiliency in mind. And the article I read too, it just said storm uprooted a few trees and tore shingles from roofs, but other than that, there was no major damage.
So, and I really liked the mention of the native plants along the roadways, encouraging the importance of vegetation, because all we usually hear about, and frankly, what we've been hearing a lot about in the wake of Hurricane Ian, is this idea that if we just build buildings that are stronger, if we build up on stilts above the floodplain or above the floodwaters, that's going to make things safer and better. And the truth is that's not really what happens. If you're building in the floodplain on stilts or on the ground, you've compromised the floodplain. which has impacts for people downstream. And we've talked about that before. And the floodwaters are getting higher and higher, and the storms are getting more intense and more frequent. And so building yourself on stilts now above what is believed to be high enough to be above the floodwaters when they come today doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the case 5 years or 10 years from now. And if you're up on stilts and you're surrounded by water, you're up on stilts and surrounded by water. And that doesn't mean you're in a safe place or space, right? It means that you're literally on an island in all of these floodwaters. So I think it's really important that it sounds like part of their climate resiliency includes healthy nature, which is a really important part of the solution.
Yeah, no, it's cool. And actually, I thought it was interesting because it's not the person I would think would yeah, so when I was reading it, it was actually interesting because the community was developed not by the type of person that I would think would come up about this. So I'm pleasantly surprised, which is great. Maybe there's a mind shift. But Babcock Ranch, according to an NPR article, is the brainchild of Sid Kitson, a 64-year-old former professional football player who made his name in the 1980s with the Green Bay Packers.
I do think that the more and more people learn about clean and renewable energy, how it is economically more efficient, right? You're better off economically in terms of it becoming more costly to install them, but also you have less problems once they're installed. There really are a lot of benefits from going down the clean and renewable energy pathway. And I just think the more investors and others realize that, the more and more investments we're seeing, the more and more clean and renewable infrastructure we're seeing and we're experiencing and we're benefiting from. And it really is taking off and overtaking the fossil fuel industry. But the thing that's so interesting, right, is this story is coming out from Hurricane Ian about how great it is that this community maintained their power because they have clean and renewable energy as a primary energy source, it sounds like. But this isn't actually a new story. All the way back over 10 years ago, 2012, people might remember we had Superstorm Sandy. And amongst the places that were hit really, really hard was New York City, northern New Jersey. And already at that time, there were stories that were coming out. The communities that were supported by, there were a number of communities in New Jersey and New York that were supported by clean energy and were on what are called microgrids, right? So they weren't hooked into the big overall grid. They had more localized systems that their power went into and out of. And those communities during and after the storm remained powered while everybody else lost their power. And there are stories from one community in New York City about how weird it was that they had light. And I think it was at a college campus. They had light where they were, but then when you looked out at the rest of the city, it was all dark because at this one location, they had clean energy, solar power hooked into a microgrid, and everywhere else, they were on the main grid, which is largely fossil fuel powered. And so when Superstorm Sandy knocked it all out, everybody else lost power except those regions or communities that had these solar options, solar and or other options. And again, specifically connected to a microgrid versus the overall grid, if you know what I'm talking about when I say that.
I don't, but
okay, so I can explain it to you based on our house, right? So we have where our house outside of Philadelphia has geothermal and solar, and we're an all electric house. But our service in the area is provided by Pico, and we actually have to hook in to the main electricity infrastructure, the wires and the grid that supplies energy throughout this region. So when our solar panels make electricity or energy, it goes into that overall grid. And then when we need power, it comes out. And what we're really doing is we don't actually know what power we're utilizing in our house. Because it's not coming directly from our roof into the house, it's coming from our roof into the grid, and then we're getting power back out. but the net evens out, right? Like we make enough power to cover what we use. So when that Pico system goes out because of a major storm event, we actually lose power at our house because the whole regional grid goes down. And so we go down and we can't pull power out. And we are required by law to hook into that system in the location that we're at. Like we can't be quote
Gotcha.
unquote off grid, but our New York house is off grid. And so the solar that's generated on our rooftop immediately comes down into our house. And that's what powers us there. Again, another all electric house. And so it comes from the roof into the house or into the batteries where it gets stored. And so at night we have power because we've stored the power in the batteries. So that's sort of on grid, off grid. These microgrids are sort of mini systems, the way I understand it, that might fuel a community like the one that you're talking about. And so the solar or the wind power gets created and it comes into that community system and then it goes back out to the community. And so when the big grid for the whole state or whatever around them goes out, as long as their microgrid is still working, they're still powered. So it's kind of like in the middle. It's not the big grid. It's not just their one house. It's the community and their own specialized little system. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
in North Jersey and New York during Superstorm Sandy, there were reports about communities that were on those microgrids that were fueled by solar panels and or wind. They maintained power for their community because they were on this microgrid system. So we've actually known that when the big storms come through, if you are on one of these smaller systems, you are going to be better off and can be powered through the storm and immediately after the storm than if you're on the main grid, primarily powered by fossil fuels.
Ah, I gotcha. Okay. Well, and it's interesting because reading this, it made me think about way back in college, my freshman year, my teacher lived in an eco village. And she said so we got to go have a tour of the eco village. And I was like, oh man, everybody's going to be living, even as a hippy dippy person, I'm like, everyone's going to be living in yurts. There's no way this is going to be good. But it was really interesting to see. And so for anyone who doesn't know, Ithaca, New York is like literally the saying is, Ithaca is 10 square miles surrounded by reality, which is just like, it's this really incredible place. And I can't talk about it too much. I get too excited and sad. But it was a cool place. So that eco village in Ithaca, it's 175 acres, 100 homes, 220 residents. And when we toured the homes, so there's three neighborhoods, there's Frog, Song, and Tree, which I love. I just said to you this morning that you should retire there. And I stand by that because it's great. But it's really cool because when we went in the houses, like there's the two older neighborhoods, the houses are clearly of a bigger size. And then the new neighborhood is a smaller footprint, but still like it's not any smaller than like a townhome anybody would get. But there's solar panel, there's the housing is made with geothermal or to like also help keep heating in mind. And one of the interesting things I thought also too is that over 80% of the 175 acres will remain as open green space, and they have 50 acres that are actually held in a conservation easement by the Finger Lakes Land Trust. And like really truly, I feel like when you talk about these eco communities, sometimes people think you're sacrificing a lot. They're really nice. Like I would live, no problem, I would live there. They're so nice and it's such a cool community. And they are, I think that was the cool thing reading about Babcock Ranch is it wasn't just, the articles were saying they weren't just built to be like eco-conscious and eco-minded, but this one being in Florida was they're like, we're building this for bigger and worse storms. And they said like, we don't know. Ian was a category 4, so they don't know what will happen with category 5, but they were still kind of in the brunt of the storm, and to come out with very little damage and also not lose power, which I think is one of the scariest things for people. Like all your food goes bad, you don't have running water. I mean, I guess Florida doesn't have to worry about getting cold, but I just think it's like, this is not a totally new concept. The eco village in Ithaca has been around since the 90s. You're muted.
The thing is, when you talk about both of them, I think part of the thought process that's so important that makes this kind of community emerge and be such a wonderful place to live is not only because it's environmentally friendly, not only because of the other benefits you've talked about, but it is built to be a community. And when we think about building and living in community, we're thinking about building and living in ways that are healthy for ourselves, healthy for the bigger community, and enjoyable places to be, where you can go and enjoy a neighbor or enjoy private nature. You sort of have the best of all worlds when you're thinking about what do we as people need to enjoy happy, safe, healthy lives. And it means we need community and access to and support from one another. We need healthy nature for that peace of mind and the health benefits and the exercise and the psychological benefits it provides. And of course, we need healthy nature because that's what gives us clean water, clean air. And there are plants and animals that just by knowing that they exist enriches our lives. But I think it's that community thought process that results in the creation of these kinds of powerful places.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly to the Ithaca Eco Village, so they have, and most, I don't know, Babcock Ranch, reading it, it sounds like they also do really emphasize this like communal space. It is definitely a significantly larger village. Like there's a couple thousand people, I think, is what I read. And like I said, the Ithaca one is about like 200, 2000 home neighborhood, and the Ithaca one is like 200 people, so it's a smaller community. But the Ithaca one too, I remember they have like, there's the center house that everybody goes to, and I think they did have like once a week they would all go and they would make dinner together. And I think the laundry might have been there. It's so long ago, but basically there were a lot of things that also kind of, you can't go and not be part of the community, which I think is so nice. Babcock Ranch, again, sounds like it's a little bit bigger, but also too, regarding the green space, they have updated on their website that they're building a trail network, which will extend over 50 miles, which people can bike, walk, and run along. So I think that's really cool. And yeah, it's like, even I remember walking the Eco Village in Ithaca. It's its own little secluded place up in not that far actually out of town, maybe like a 5-minute drive. But you just walk in nature, and they have a community garden. There's a little pond. They have all their trees. I mean, really, like, and a 2-bedroom, $1,500 a month to rent. So you could test it out. And they're like, this is for you to test out if you want to live here.
When you were talking, what you reminded me of, and I don't know, you probably do remember, when you were young, I had the good fortune for a brief period of time to send you to a Waldorf school. Waldorf school is such a powerful place. And one of the things, I mean, that was really, you were in there pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and then first grade. It was the daycare where I sent you to, because they do have that pre-kindergarten program. And I think it was every Friday, you'd have to pick a vegetable that you would take into school, and all you children together would work to make a soup. And the soup was made from whatever vegetables each of the children brought in. And so you would work together to create your soup, cook your soup, and you'd sit down together and eat your soup. And also on that day, you made bread together. So your soup was complemented by delicious bread.
I remember
the bread, whole idea of community.
The bread was my favorite because I don't like soup, so my brain must have blocked out that part. But I remember the bread because we got to put on the desk, we had like the little mill to like ground down the grain. And that was like my favorite thing to do. Yeah, no, it was cool. And it made you appreciate too, like when we got to do, so my one teacher had a farm, and we would learn how to like dye she would bring in wool from her sheep, and we would learn how to dye it using flowers, and that was always a group activity. She taught us how to use the spindle, and that was always a group activity. Yeah, you never did anything on your own, which was really cool and really enjoyable. And I think I missed that a lot. And definitely going to a public school. Public schools are great, and it's a great opportunity for so many people, but it definitely felt a little bit more like, oh, we don't get to do all these things.
Well, and the thing is, for the reason why we ended up moving to, well, Oma died, and so we moved into her house. But Radnor Township is a really great school district. There are a lot of things about the area that I don't appreciate, but there are a lot of things that I do. And one of them is the fact that they have a really good educational program, and it is a public school system. And so you were able to go free of charge and get a really great education. And that is so important. Now, I know that there are different levels of support in different public school systems, and really all public school systems need to be brought up so they are powerful and beneficial and supportive, and there's equity across the board. But being able to be part of a public school system is valuable because you can get educated for free. And there's no way that I, as a single mother at the time, would have been able to afford to send you to a private school of any kind. But I will say that the Waldorf school system is so supportive, and they have such a great way of thinking about child development and child education, and nurturing the individual part of each of the children, but also stressing the importance of, as you said, working in community, what you can accomplish when you work together, and the joy and the value of working together. So I just think that's important.
Well, I was gonna say too, I think it's always kind of stuck with me, just like a tiny little side story, is that like several years ago in high school, I interviewed to be a camp counselor at Riverbend, which is a nature camp, and I got it. And one of the interview questions was, so you're doing an activity with kids and you need green paint and you run out of green paint, what do you do? And I said, well, assuming that there's blue and yellow paint, I would just mix them and make more green. And then I said, like, or I'd go out and like find leaves and do other stuff, I was trying to amp it. And the guy who interviewed me at the end of it, he's like, yeah, you got it. And he goes, you'd actually be surprised at how many people don't know to mix blue and yellow. And that was one of the things at Waldorf school, was you didn't get like all the colors. You got red, blue, and yellow, which are the primary colors. And if you wanted any other color, you had to learn how to mix it. And again, too, we'd all sit in a circle and paint together. And I remember being like, Katie, I don't know how to make orange. And she'd do it. So it was a big community. And that's what I think when I was reading about the Babcock Ranch, Ithaca, I think like not a lot of people know how great of a town Ithaca is. So things are like kind of more affordable. Maybe like if you go to Ithaca, you know what, it's great. I would move there in a heartbeat. But reading, the houses in Babcock Ranch do start at $250,000. Which I think is, and obviously like right now the housing market is crazy. And I just do like, that is not affordable for a lot of people, who could really like use a climate resilient home, that already have to expend so many of their funds to just like even keep the lights on, to pay their groceries, let alone having to find a new place to live, fix up their car after it's been flooded, all that stuff. And again, I think we've talked about this several times, like a lot of environmentally friendly things right now are expensive, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do them. It means that the process should be working towards making it more affordable, especially for people that need it the most.
And that's one of the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act that I appreciate. There are plenty of things in there that I don't appreciate, that are about supporting fossil fuels. But on the clean energy side, there are aspects of that law that are not just about supporting the expansion of clean and renewable energy options and taking us down that clean energy path, but making clean energy opportunities like solar panels accessible to people who have lesser money than others, right? Who are on the lower side of the income scale. And I just think that that's really important. And also making sure that the job creation that happens in the clean and renewable energy industry goes to environmental justice communities, that we're giving training to people to teach them in these environmental justice communities, to teach them how to be part of the clean energy industry, so that when those jobs become available, we have more and more people trained to take advantage of them. And all those people are not people with lots of money that went to, big expensive colleges, and therefore are ready and primed to take all of those great jobs. There seems to be a real mindfulness about greater equity in how the Inflation Reduction Act makes clean and renewable energy itself as well as the job creation more equitably available across communities. And I just think that that's really important.
And I think it would be great too. Like, I'm not reading their website. I'm not clear if it's its own separate school system or it's like a supplementary place that the parents can send their schools. But there is the Babcock Neighborhood School, and they have an ultimate experiential learning classroom. And it looks like they do a lot of science and nature-based stuff. And again, I just think that'd be really cool. It would be really cool too if it's like, if it is just a supplementary school, that it would be open to other students coming in and learning that. Because again, I think it's also, we've had Byron from Delaware Riverkeeper Network come on and talk about like the foundations of children in nature and how it's really important. And I do think for me, like, obviously you're my mom, so like this was bound to happen anyways. But like going to the Waldorf school and having to do a lot of those things and really like spending time outside. I mean, I had pre-K, or I had kindergarten field trips. We just went to my teacher's farm and hung out with chickens all day. And it's so great for kids and to learn about all those foundations that I think was also really instrumental in me becoming who I am, and like really encouraging outdoor play and outdoor time. Um, that I don't think that I think even in a good public school I kind of got, but it still wasn't the same. Like, I don't know.
It's not the same, but at Radnor, they have in 7th grade, they have the watersheds program. And the watersheds, right now, the watersheds program is accessible to only a limited number of students based on a lottery draw. And you didn't draw that lottery ticket, and them did. But it's
got every lottery ticket somehow.
Well, it's a program that's just for the 7th grade year, and it's all focused. All the learning is focused around watersheds and waterways and water systems. And you learn the basics, you know, of English and math and those important things. But the rest of the curriculum is very outdoor, nature connected based mindfulness. And I think that that's a really powerful program too. And I wish it had been accessible to all the students who wanted to participate. Not everybody wants to participate in that kind of program, and it's not right for everybody, but it's so sad that it was on such a limited basis. I think it's something like, you know, 30 kids out of that whole grade get to participate. But there are programs like that. And for people who want to learn more about the power and importance of time in nature, and it doesn't mean you have to go to a Waldorf school or be part of a watershed program, just being out in nature is really powerful and beneficial in terms of kids learning about their own strengths, learning as a person, right? Their physical strength, but also their mental strength, developing relationship skills, understanding science and math. Really, everything is supported by having time in nature. And anybody who really wants to learn more about that from a very interesting, informative book, I would recommend that you read Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. I actually talk about it in my book, The Green Amendment, both the first edition and the second edition, because it's one of those books that when I read it, it just has always stuck with me in terms of the learning. So Last Child in the Woods, really powerful read. But I do want to go back to one thing on the storms and solar wind power front. You know, a lot of people imagine, and because solar and wind farms are out in the open, that they are much more exposed to damage. And yes, they are much more exposed, but at least in terms of the research that I've read and the experiences in New York and New Jersey, and it sounds like what you talked about in Florida, is that these facilities do not, in fact, experience a lot of damage, that they are constructed to be more resistant to the damage when the big storms come, because they are by their very nature more outdoors. And that when damage has been identified, very often it doesn't shut down the whole system. It might limit it somewhat. You might lose those panels and the energy they would create, but you maintain the other aspects of the system that continue to create power. And the same is true for wind turbines. And actually in Sandy, they found that the wind turbines really did not get a lot of damage, and they got up to very, very high speeds, 110 miles per hour, and didn't and didn't sustain major damage despite being tested in that very powerful way. So I really just want to offer that intuitively one might think, oh gosh, these systems are out in the storms, and so they're going to get ruined and everything is going to shut down. But that hasn't been the experience. And by contrast, what we do know in the typical power grid that is powered by fossil fuels all along the system, we do see damage. We do see shutdowns. We see whole communities shut down for long periods of time. And so for people to suggest, well, you get damage in clean and renewable energy, so that's bad. Well, number one, it's not the full experience. It's much more limited. But number two, that's sort of to suggest that on the fossil fuel front, we're not experiencing damage, when in fact we are, and lots of it. And systems are shutting down for long periods of time, right? So there's also that juxtaposition between the two, and all the way around. You're just better off all the way around going down the clean energy path.
Well, I just know they're like, wow, it's going to get destroyed. Like, and the power, what if we don't have sun? Okay, well, even when you do have sun and a hurricane comes through, then all the power goes out anyways. So like, again, with this, they did well. And I think the other thing too, that a lot of people, and like you just talked about, reading the Babcock Ranch website, is they have a like center that manages all their solar, and pretty much they ensure that on a consistent basis that the amount of power that they're taking in exceeds the amount the town consumes. So there's always like a little bit extra for times like this. So yeah, I mean, there's just no reason to not do it. It should become more affordable. Hopefully that will be happening in the near future. And hopefully too, like as communities are being rebuilt through storms like this, we'll see more of these kind of pop up.
Yeah. And the other thing is you noted earlier about hippy dippy, right? You don't have to just be hippy dippy. In fact, the military sees the benefits of going down the clean energy path, because if you're in the middle of a war, what's your enemy going to target? Your supply chain, and particularly your energy supply chain. So if you've got a helicopter in fossil fuels, well, that's a big obvious target. And instead, if they've got solar generators operating on the ground, well, you don't have that same kind of exposure. So it's not just about hippy dippies, right? It's about people who want to make money. They're investing in clean and renewable energy. The military sees the value of clean and renewable energy. Really, all smart people see the value of clean and renewable energy. And we're smart people.
I would agree. Yeah, so I think with that is our episode for this week. Again, if you enjoy what we do and we talk about, there are 2 donation links in our episode description. You can feel free to go down and donate to Green Amendments for the Generations. If you believe that people should have a constitutional right to clean air, pure water, and healthy environment. You can also go down and donate to Delaware Riverkeeper Network. If you live in the Delaware River watershed or just are a big fan of the Delaware River, feel free to do that. And there's a third link, Mom.
Third link. Oh, yes, there's a third link to the upcoming great book called The Green Amendment, The People's Fight for a Clean, Safe, and Healthy Environment. It's coming out November 1, but I've started to do some talks, did the debut of my new book talk, and it seemed to be very well received before the Ridgewood League of Women Voters in New Jersey. And so that was fun and exciting, and to get the positive feedback was really great. So, but the book is coming soon, and I'm getting excited. If you're interested, every penny from your purchase, that's profit, of course, not the cost of manufacture, but all the profit goes to support protecting the environment. And if you happen to be part of a group that likes to have speakers, or of a speakers series at the local school or in the local library, I'd love to come talk to your community. And so at that link, you'll also be able to find a pathway to maybe work with me to set up a talk so we can talk about the Green Amendment movement together in person or on Zoom.
Awesome. And I think with that, we will see you all next time.
See you all next time.